And so I was on a special issuance medical for only about a year, and then continued my aviation life. At the same time as being a pilot, I was seeing my neurosurgeon, and I would see him every 6 months, sometimes every 8 to a year, and we would do a scan. And I would do a scan, go see him. He would say, the scan looks great. I'll see you in 6 months. I'll see you in a year, etc., etc. And this went on for 9 years of my life. The horror of that, like seeing the other side of this story, is something I'm still trying to heal from and process, because I think it's going to take a while to understand that when you put your trust into a medical professional and you're so blindly led by them, it changed my entire outlook on advocacy and what I need to be looking for as a patient. So in 2021, when I went and saw him on my routine check, he said, oh, the spot in your brain has changed a little bit. Now, he always would refer to my spot in my brain as a birthmark. He would always say, it's a very small, pea-sized birthmark. And he would use that exact term. So the very few people that knew about it, I would say, oh yeah, I have a birthmark in my brain. And I do remember being looked at, like, when people would hear that, like, what does that even mean? And now when I look back, yeah, what does that even mean? That's not a correct terminology, and I learned that when I went to Cedars-Sinai. But he said in 2021, yeah, the spot has changed a little bit. And my mom and I said, well, what does change look like? Like, what do you mean when you say change? What do you mean? And he said, well, it's just like a microscopic change, and it's nothing to worry about, and we'll just check it in a year. So we left, went on our way. I didn't really tell anybody and kept flying. The FAA knew all my scans because I sent them every scan every time, and I was fine. So 2022 comes around. The spot's changed. I said, okay, what does that mean? He said, well, it's probably just the way that the technician that was helping laid you down in the machine. I said, okay, great, send me on my way. 2023 rolled around. The spot's changed. But don't worry, it hasn't changed that much. He, in fact, said at this point, you would need a microscope to see how much it changed. So why would we be worried? You know, my mom and I sat there and said, okay, you say it's nothing, we're gonna believe you, and I'm just gonna go and continue my professional career. And granted, I was asymptomatic still, always have been, might as well mention, never had a symptom, anything other than the back pain, which was completely unrelated. This was a completely accidental find. So in 2024, when I met with him, which I met with him twice, it was the end of 2023 and into the early of 2024. I saw him in November of 2023, did a scan, and he said, it's changed again. Let's do another one in 3 months instead of 6 months in a year. I said, okay. So we did another scan in February of 2024. And from November to February, it changed. He never showed urgency. He never showed a nervousness of what it might be. And he still said, it's just a birthmark. Like, let's just keep monitoring it. But in the February result, he said he didn't like how it was changing. So he wanted me to get a second opinion. So called the insurance. He wanted an opinion from UCLA. Didn't have insurance for that. Fought with insurance from February, March, and April to try and get into UCLA. And I think if his urgency would have been different, mine would have been different, and my family's would have been different. But he kept telling us everything was fine and not to worry about a thing. It's just a birthmark, and he just wants a second opinion. And mind you, I was at the prime of my career with airline offers and 3,000 hours of flight time and. So booking an appointment for UCLA for a second opinion seemed like just a check off a list for us. Just let's check that box, and it's just a birthmark, and let's move on. So for 2 months, fought insurance, waiting for the UCLA appointment, and just like a week before this appointment, my neurosurgeon calls and said, I got you approved to go to Cedars-Sinai because I know the regional director of Blue Shield, and look, we're approving you for Cedars-Sinai. My innocent heart had never known these major hospitals. You know, college, I knew of UCLA, so I was like, okay, great. Cedars-Sinai, I was like, okay, great. It must be just another major hospital. So I didn't know the magnitude of what Cedars-Sinai meant or what it was until we showed up. And so April 30th of 2024, like it was a Tuesday last week, I can remember it, we had booked an appointment with a surgeon on staff. Now again, I did not know it was not normal to see a neurosurgeon because I'd always seen one since I was younger. I saw a neurologist early and then straight into a neurosurgeon, and so when they said go see a neurosurgeon for your second opinion, I didn't have red alarm bells at the time. And we obviously sent in all the scans and everything I had over 9 years of my life, which I think I've counted over 50, 60 scans at this point, MRI scans over the years. And so Cedars-Sinai already had all of my stuff before I even got there because I sent it over. So they already knew what I didn't know when I arrived. And because it was so laid back and it was all made to believe that it was so normal, my dad didn't come with me. We didn't have any family come with. We didn't even tell any family. I didn't tell any friends. Like, it was just my mom, my boyfriend, and me. Went to the normal appointment on Tuesday, April 30th, to meet the Cedars-Sinai neurosurgeon. And I remember it genuinely like it was last week, because when you walk into an environment and call it human intuition, you sit down in a room, you can feel it, you know something's wrong. And so this part of the story is so harrowing because the nurse came in first, and it was, like I said, just mom, boyfriend, me in a room. And the nurse came in first and asked a series of questions, and the questions were very telling, I think, to the situation, but I was quite clueless about what was happening. So she asked questions like, have you ever walked into a wall? Have you ever had a seizure? Have you ever lost consciousness? Do you feel unsteady when you walk? Things like that. And I remember looking at this nurse and just being like, I fly people professionally as a pilot. I have a clean bill of health. I've never had a symptom. Like, I don't even know what she was asking because I'd never been asked those questions before from my previous 9-year doctor. It was always just, okay, great, see you in 6 months. So I said, no, I have no symptoms, none of those, and I'm just here for a second opinion for my birthmark. And I remember saying birthmark to this team of doctors. First it was the nurse, and I remember their faces. I remember their looks of like, oh, this poor girl has no idea. This poor girl has been misled. And I didn't realize how bad I had been misled until pathology. But she walks out, she says, okay, I'm gonna go fill in the resident and I'm gonna come back and bring the resident in. So a resident walks in, sits down, asks the same slew of questions, and this time he was directing the questions at my mom and boyfriend, saying, have you noticed character changes? And have you noticed she gets confused and she gets tired, and energy levels and hunger levels, and just different psychological questions that were directed directly to them. And I was sat right in front of him, and I was like, why are we talking to them? Like, I'm just here for a second opinion. Nothing's wrong. Got an airline to get back to next week. Like, let's speed this up, essentially. That's where I was at. Let's speed this appointment up. They answered truthfully, no, she's never walked into a wall. No, she's never had a seizure. No, she's never had any confusion, disorientation, nothing. The resident said, okay, I'm gonna go coordinate with my surgeon and I'll bring him back. I said, okay.